I'll be your host tonight. We've got another great show tonight. Manny Leinz is here, and he's here to follow up on a presentation that he did a couple of years back about his remote observatory. So I'm looking forward to hearing the update on that. But before we get to the presentation, let's just take a quick look at the calendar. Let me pull that up here. There we go. All right, so we've got a number of interesting programs coming up after tonight. Next week, we've got Greg Krinklaw, and he's the developer of Sky Tools, and he'll be here to talk about optimizing your image capture. And then we've got Craig Stock coming back to talk about some of his innovative post-processing techniques using a combination of PixInsight and Photoshop. Then we've got Adam Block coming on to talk about his new color mapping script, which he's really excited about, and I know a lot of other folks are too. And so we've got a few other shows lined up, but we do have some open dates when we get into December. So certainly if any of you out there have an idea for a program, something that you've been just dying to talk about, if you could just click on the contact page here and put in your information, we'll get back to you and get you on the program. And one other thing I wanted to mention, our TAIC workshop, we were just talking about that tonight. We've been trying to pin down a date for that, and we decided that we're going to do the next workshop on January 28th. We don't have that on the calendar yet, but that'll be the date, January 28th. And we were just talking a little bit about what data set to use. We'll decide that here shortly. And once we have that, we'll post the data set and the information here on the workshop page. So this link here will take you to the workshop page. And as you can see, we also we've had a number of the workshops over the last few years, and so all of that data is still on here. For instance, the last workshop we had, which was real popular, the Skull and Crossbones from Kevin Moorfield. We had Eric's California Nebula, Terry's Tarantula data. We've had a number of really nice data sets to work up, and these are all still here on the website, so feel free to download those and work those up if you'd like. And as I mentioned, then we will we'll post that new data set here once we get that decided. So let me stop sharing here. All right. So, well, that brings us then to tonight's presentation. And as I mentioned, Manny Leinz is here with us tonight. And I'm sure many of you recall the last time that Manny was on the show, which was back in July of 2020. And in that episode, Manny had talked about the early stages of the process that he went through with his remote observatory, designing it and building it and planning it and then starting to use it. So at that time, we had talked about having him back on the program at some point once the observatory had been up and running for a while, so he could tell us how it's been going and some other things he's learned since then. So Manny, if you're ready, I'll turn it over to you for your presentation.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. All right. Let me go ahead and do this. All right. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Looks good.
Okay, very good. Well, as Patrick said, I'm Manny Leinz. Glad to be back with you all. We just dive right into this here. So kind of an agenda for tonight's talk. I just give a little quick snapshot about me. I'm going to talk about the design of the observatory and a little bit of the details. Just this is going to be mostly review from 3 years ago, over 3 years. Comparison of the status from back in 2020 to now, We'll talk a little bit about the control strategy, just the overall idea of how we, how we want to make sure we have a safe and functional system for controlling the observatory. And I'm a hardware guy, a hardware engineer by training and education, but I'm going to talk about software first, which is always dangerous when the hardware guys talk about software. Then I'll go into the hardware after that, and some of the safety systems in particular. Talk about a typical night of remote imaging and the steps I go through for that. A little bit about limitations to what I currently have and where I'm going in the near term. And then it is the Astro Imaging Channel, so I have a couple of astro images to share, some resources, because there's a lot of material here, and then how to get in touch with me if you're interested. Okay, so this is pretty much review from last time, but I retired from Boeing back in 2015. I was a manager there. I worked on their spacecraft autonomous rendezvous and docking technology. So if anybody wants to know about that, I'm happy to come back and do another presentation to the Astro Imaging Channel on how you dock spacecraft. But I've been an amateur astronomer for over 30 years. More recently got into astro imaging. I've been a member of the Riverside Astronomical Society for a while now, part of their outreach program. And I've always dreamed of having my own observatory. And so this is a realization of a dream for me. And I'm also a guitar player. I think we talked about that earlier. And I love photography, travel, and family history when I get around to it. So a little bit of review on the observatory itself. It's at our mountain home near Mariposa, California. We've got Bortle 3 skies, I would say maybe Bortle 2 looking to the north. You can see here this image was taken looking to the south toward Fresno, so you can see the light pollution here in the image. It was built way back, I can't even believe it. It was built way back in 2017 in November, and we had BYO build it. They did a very nice job. I definitely would recommend them if you don't want to get out there with a hammer and saw yourself. It's a roll-off roof design, as you can see in the photo. Simpler than a dome with a slit to deal with, and also it doesn't scream expensive astronomy equipment inside. It's 15 by 8, so 120 square feet. That's not an accident. That is the largest size in California that you can have without a building permit. It quote unquote plugs in to the power panel, which you can not really see very well, but right there. So it's literally an extension cord, but functionally it is plugged in, and power is available all the time. It's designed to accommodate 2 piers, one for astro imaging and then one for observational astronomy. That one is not yet installed. It has a platform floor, so this simplifies running cables underneath, and it's also a little bit cheaper than pouring concrete. So that's why we have that. So as of July 2020, this is a picture from that era. So at that time, we had the structure complete, including the roof motor, which is up in the left-hand corner here. I'm pointing at the wrong screen. I know you guys can't see anything I'm pointing. I just now realized that. And it's wall power. The internet was installed. We had a PC in the observatory, which is in the corner here. Had a weather station up and operating, and you can see that the insulation, this is Reflectix insulation, was going in, and wallboard. I have a whole lot of things I could say about whether to insulate and not to insulate, but let me say that I did a lot of testing and came to the conclusion that as long as you use reflective type insulation and thin wallboard, you are okay with cool down, and you're not trapping a lot of heat. So even back in 2020, we had the ability to control the observatory from our home on the property, but it was strictly manual control. So you had to walk up a couple hundred feet to the top of the hill to the observatory to open the roof. And we don't obviously have to do that anymore. Also back then, there was no situational awareness. cameras or anything to tell you where the scope was pointing or whether it was pointing at all. Or we didn't have any backup power or safety systems. So we're going to talk about that today. The imaging setup now is the same as it was in July 2020. It's a RASA 11 V2, which I can't say enough good things about. It's been a wonderful scope. Ioptron C120, CM120 mount, which is scope is kind of underweight for that mount. I could put probably a second telescope on there if I wanted to. I've got a one-shot color camera, the ASI 294, and 60 millimeter guide scope and monochrome guide camera. Wrong way. Okay, I'm not going to talk. I'm sure you're going to be glad that I will not talk about this chart in detail. I don't know how well you can see it on the net. But my main point here is where we were back in 2020 with manual startup and shutdown, and then these different phases I had lined out. We've progressed through those and are now onto what I call phase 3B, which is full remote autonomy and being able to run from our home in Southern California or really anywhere in the world if I wanted to. And there's a detailed listing here of all of the various subsystems. So if you review this later, you can probably pick up some tidbits that I may have missed in the slides that are coming up. Okay, observatory control strategy. The next chart provides a detailed summary of my strategy for controlling the observatory. And it is, in a nutshell, avoid Microsoft Windows. And we're going to talk about that a little bit right now. So I specifically wanted to avoid the overhead of the Windows operating system for controlling the computer. Rather, wanted to have a small, low power, low cost system that is responsible for monitoring and controlling the observatory roof, the power and the safety systems. It's got to be on 24/7. It's got to be backed up with by a battery. And so, being reliable and lightweight is really important. Also, I really have a bias toward open source software. And so I spent a lot of time looking for different options for control software and specifically looking for something open source if I could. And as you'll see on the next slide, I definitely found it. So the interfaces to the imaging computer, which is a Windows PC, is minimal is the desire, and in practice today there's actually no interface at all between the two computers. That may change, it will probably change, but for now they're actually completely separate. Also, I really don't like Wi-Fi for anything that is important and critical. I just had too many experiences with Wi-Fi dropouts, and so I really bias toward hardwire interfaces, Ethernet, or discrete digital on-off type signals. So the only thing right now that's Wi-Fi in the observatory is the weather station, which is not mission critical. So those were the kind of guiding principles on the last chart. This chart here, we're talking about how that got implemented. And so that small single board computer, I've chosen the Raspberry Pi. And I don't know if some of you are familiar with the Pi, but it was developed by a nonprofit called the Raspberry Pi Foundation out of the UK. The particular model that I'm using is a Pi 4, 64-bit ARM processor, 1.8 gigahertz quad core, 4 gig of RAM, and also has gigabit Ethernet, USB ports, and plugged in to the one of those USB ports is a 128 megabyte SSD, which is where the program memory is stored. Also, we have the interface to all the observatory sensors and effectors is done here through the Pi, and that's through this 40-pin general purpose input-output bus over here. So the board also has Wi-Fi if you must. It has dual HDMI ports if you're going to run a monitor. In my case, I've got I do what's called a secure socket shell, logging into the Pi from a remote computer. And so I don't need to have those monitors, but if you wanted to, you could have a nice dual monitor set up on the Pi if you would like to do that. There's also a camera port, which on this particular Pi is not being used. I'll talk about another Pi later that is using the camera port. Software-wise, two things. Home Assistant. Home Assistant is an open source home automation software. A lot of people are using this for home automation of their primary residences. It will communicate with almost anything out there known to man. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, I guess, on the next chart. But I really love the fact that there's a large online, robust user community that is, there's a lot of videos available. There are a lot of tutorials available. So you're not alone if you decide to embark on this road with Home Assistant. And then layered on top of Home Assistant is Node-RED, which is advertised as a low-code graphical software add-on, and we'll talk about that more in just a moment. So Home Assistant, as I mentioned, runs on the Raspberry Pi. It can also run on other computers, and it integrates a wide range of home automation products, sensors and effectors, cameras, thermostats, switches, just lots and lots of stuff. Anything that you can think of that would be in a home that you wanted to make into a smart home, Home Assistant probably already has a plug-in add-on integration that will run with it. Also, it enables the creation of custom routines and scripts, so you can set trigger conditions and respond to particular actions. This is a difficult to read screen probably, but this will show you the various sensor inputs for my implementation, and also the switches that are being driven. So these are outputs, kind of inputs, outputs. Here's the weather station down here. Here are my two cameras that I have connected through the observatory. One, this is an outside camera facing out, and then this one here is inside view of the observatory. And there are various different screens, and I don't have time, unfortunately, to go through this in detail, but there are lots of resources out there if you're so inclined. Node-RED, as I mentioned, is layered on top of Home Assistant. This was initially developed by IBM as an in-house project, and in 2016, it became an open source project. And it is available as an add-on software for Home Assistant. It gives you a drag and drop block diagram type interface to connect all these different nodes together. It also has function nodes, which are JavaScript based, that allow you to do some more complex operations that the individual specific nodes may not be appropriate for. And so you also have the ability for individual flows, and there are little tabs across here which are maybe hard to read, but that would provide individual control. So for example, I have individual separate flows for the roof control, for the roof timer, for the cameras, for the power inverter, weather station, etc., etc. Okay, the other super cool thing about Node-RED and Home Assistant also actually is that the key capability is you can have a straightforward way of creating these dashboards, which are the graphical user interface that you're going to interact with when running the observatory. And so in my case, I have 3 pages. I have a control page here, I have a diagnostics page, and then I have a weather page. And mostly I'm looking at this one up here, the control page, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in an upcoming slide. So here's an example under the hood. This is a Node-RED flow. This one is the one for my roof control system, and we're going to go into some detail. The different colored nodes represent different functionality, and we're going to talk about them. So in the case of my implementation here, you can see that on the left side of the screen, we have inputs that come either from the observatory control dashboard, which was on the prior slide, or from specific sensors. So in the upper left-hand corner here, you see the input, for example, from the rain sensor. Down in the lower left-hand corner, you see an input from the roof sensors. Then outputs also to the dashboard in this teal kind of a color. We have the diagnostics dashboard over here, and then down in the lower right-hand corner, the observatory control dashboard. And then right here is the output to the roof relays. And this logic in between is how we decide what how we're responding to the commands and the safety systems, for example. So here, put on in blue highlight here the different logic functionality that's being implemented here on this particular flow. So the upper left here, this is the close on rain logic. So if we get a drop of rain, this will no questions asked close the roof. And you can probably see some lines running down into the rest of the flow here to show you how that close on rain logic interacts with the roof control logic, which is the center of the page. Also on this same flow is the power fail logic. So in the event that we go on battery power, again, no questions asked. We just close the roof. Today we don't stop the imaging computer, but that's one of the things that I definitely want to implement down the road is stopping the imaging computer when obviously we've closed the roof and there's nothing to take images of. So moving on, here's another bigger view of the observatory dashboard. So let's talk about that for a moment. On the left side are manual controls for the observatory roof. So those great big blue, green, and red buttons actually are sort of a legacy thing from the very first day when I made this dashboard. That was the very first thing I implemented. There's a current time, that's Pacific Daylight Time now. Then right here is where I can enter the open and close time that I would like to choose for the observatory. And then I have an enable here and then a submit button. And when I hit that, it basically populates these locations here. This is my confidence that I have properly set the open and close times for the roof. If in the case that they have forgotten to turn on roof power, I get a message down here warning me that I don't have roof power on. So status display here in the center section. So this will tell me the status of the roof. It'll tell me the status of the entry door to the observatory, whether or not it's raining, and the inside and outside temperature, and also crucially the dew point, which is important for deciding when it's time to turn on the dew heater. And also I have, really like this, I have control of the IR light for the situational awareness camera. I like to turn that off when I'm imaging. I don't think it probably would hurt things, but I just feel better with it off, not having any stray light. I don't want to have to rely on that IR block filter to kill the infrared light here from the situational awareness camera. So power here, each one of these is an individual switch that will control the power supplies on the web power switch. I'm going to talk about that hardware in just a little bit. And then this turns the monitors on and off inside the observatory. Obviously, I have an all-sky camera. This controls power to that. This is the enable, roof enable. This is sort of a fail-safe for me. I normally keep this switch off. And so even if I had forgotten to disable my roof control here, I would still not be able to open the roof when I don't want to open the roof. I have more spares than are actually indicated on here. I have a total of 16 channels actually, and I'm only using looks like 10 of them. This controls the telescope mount, the imaging camera, the USB hub, and the guide camera, and then a separate control for the dew heater. And this right here is status imagery or status signals from the power inverter, and I'll talk about that in a minute as well. Okay, the diagnostics dashboard. There's more on here maybe than meets the eye. In the upper left, there are two actual individual roof switches. There's a roof open switch and a roof closed switch. So if the roof is open and the roof is not closed, that means the roof is ajar, and the status on the prior page will actually tell you that. So if, for example, if either I left it intentionally ajar, or if something bad happened and the motor stopped halfway through, I would know that that the roof is ajar. This tells you what the rain sensor status is. In this case, there's no rain. And this is the CPU fan for the Raspberry Pi. And so right now, the CPU fan is off in this condition. And I have it set to at 60 degrees C, that fan will automatically come on, and it drops the temperature on the Pi even on a hot day down a good 10 degrees C. So the fan is pretty effective that way. I also have, I'm constantly monitoring the internet. So I'm pinging actually the Google server here and getting a response time and logging that in here. So we've recently gotten fiber internet at our home. And so things are a whole lot better than they were just a couple of weeks ago. But we had DSL before that, and it was pretty dodgy. We would have times when the ping time would go up to a second or more, or worse, it would drop out completely for a while. In this case, for my safety systems, even though the imager could keep running just fine, if we lost internet, for safety purposes, I just close the roof. If we have a long-term situation with no internet, which hasn't ever happened, but if it did, I don't want the roof open. So I have the ability through this little ping monitor to automatically close the roof. So this gives you an idea. I have an opportunity to log how many times the ping came back. It actually pings every 20 seconds. If I didn't get a ping, I log that as a fail. I also log the current communication status, which is kind of funny because if the communication status was bad, I probably wouldn't know because the communication status is bad. So that's kind of funny, but anyway, that gives me some feedback here. It tells me how long it takes for the ping, how long it was since I last reset the ping counter, and then I also have a Wake on LAN server. So another thing that the Pi does here is it goes to the other devices on our local net, and it will periodically send an auto wake signal to them. So if I have a computer, if we lost power at our home, which actually happens fairly frequently, the computers don't turn themselves back on. So I can have this auto wake where it'll send a wake on LAN signal to the computer and turn it back on. And then we also have a backup server. So we have a home server here. I don't know how much, I don't really talk about this very much, but we have a Nextcloud server here at our home in Southern California. We have a backup server at our home in Mariposa. So that gives us our offsite safety backup. And this actually tells us the status of that backup server. And then finally, weather. And I talked about the weather station during my first talk back in 2020, so I won't go into too much detail, but it is an ambient weather station, 0900, which you can't get anymore, but ambient weather makes new and improved versions. So here's a version of it sitting back in the observatory as it looked in 2020. This little, I did it again. This is our little local internet router for the Wi-Fi in the observatory, which is great when I'm there and I want to connect with my cell phone, and also for the weather station. And then this is the little access point for the weather station. And then right here on the screen are the different things that different capabilities, different data that I can see. So for example, we can see the inside and outside temperature and the dew point. You can see what happens here when the sun comes up, things warm up. And then also humidity inside and outside, rain, And then I'm also tracking the monthly high and low temperature, which is kind of nice as well. Wind speed, gusts, and then the temperature for inside and outside, and that with the cloud sensor, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. All right, so finally we get to talk about hardware, which is my favorite topic. And so here's what we have in the observatory for the hardware. So in the upper left-hand corner, if you remember that very first picture I showed of the 2020 observatory, here is the roof interface and motor, and this came with the observatory from Backyard Observatories. And this works just fine. What I've added is an interface to the Raspberry Pi. So the Pi 4 I was talking about is here. I have a closer view of that in a moment. And then I made a little roof interface here. This is not as fancy as it sounds. It's mostly just connectors and a few resistors to basically provide a centralized collection point. And I have a close-up of that. Here's the Ethernet path panel, which connects to the Pi and other subsystems, the web power switches here. Here's one of the two web power switches in the observatory. This is the power inverter, and behind it, there's the backup battery. And then this is a little telemetry box that I built. I'm going to talk about that. And this is the roof hand controller, which is still there. And I can use that to manually open and close the roof if I need to. So a little bit of a close-up view. Here is here's the Pi, the Raspberry Pi. It's powered externally to this box from the web power switch. This is the little custom board that I was talking about. This ribbon cable runs to the general purpose interface, input-output interface, that 40-pin connector that I talked about. And then, so this is the collection point where the other connectors fan out to for example, the roof motor, the roof switches, the rain sensor, the door sensor. And I also have this is the fan that I was talking about on the dashboard slide. So this is just a regular old PC case fan. There's a MOSFET transistor driver, which basically just provides the current to turn the fan on and off. So that basically is the brains of the system. And there is a clear plastic cover that seals here that keeps this all closed. And I forgot to mention, here's the SSD card, and which plugs in, has a little adapter here that is an adapter from the USB to the interface that's directly on the SSD card itself, which is a SATA interface. Okay, let's talk about power control. So this is super important. I love these digital loggers, DLI web power switches. These I know others are probably using them. I just want to give them another shout out. These things are great. They're pretty economical. This enables you to control individual observatory subsystems over the internet. They have 8 controllable, switchable AC outlets that are controllable across the internet. 40 amp relays, so that'll handle just about anything you need it to. It does support Ethernet, which again, that's definitely my preference. It does have a web GUI, graphical user interface. I'm not using that because my interface, as you saw, is built in through Home Assistant and Node-RED. And here's another snapshot of that corner of the screen from my control dashboard. So you can see here I have 2 of these power switches. This one here is mounted right next to the Raspberry Pi and under the observatory control motors, the roof motor. This one here is hard to tell here, but it's actually mounted on the pier. So because most of these power outlets here are running to the pier, and so I just put the converter, the web power switch right on the pier itself. And so this is called WP1, Web Power 1. This is Web Power 2, and you can see the various different switches here. So, and then the way I do this is rather than controlling the secondary low voltage, 12 volts or 5 volts or whatever, I just plug power bricks into these, and I just can control the 120 volt AC with the web power switches themselves. As I say, they're really economical. They work great. And so I didn't see a reason to try and control secondary power. I was going to do that. I was going to build my own thing. And then I said, you know what, this is just too easy to do it this way. There's some things here built in. For example, if you lose power, even if you lost battery backup power, there is non-volatile memory inside these guys to remember the existing state that you had. So for example, there is a switch for the Raspberry Pi control computer that is not accessible on the control panel. That's by design, because I don't want to accidentally turn it off, because then it's a catch-22. I can't turn it back on again, because that's where the dashboard lives. So, but there is a control there, and it's set to automatically come back on if power is ever lost. And you can also, through this, ping your modem or restart a modem. So anyway, just can't say enough good things about these. Really super useful. Okay, let's get into backup power. So I spent a lot of time here too, trying to decide on what to do. I finally decided that I needed about 1,000-watt inverter to be safe. When I'm in a situation where all the subsystems are on and and we lose power and I want to close the roof, that's something in the order of 50 to 60 amps coming out of this 12-volt battery that's back here. And let me tell you, those cables are not oversized. They get warm. That's 50, 60 amps is a whole lot of power. But this is a deep cycle sealed lead acid battery, and so it can handle that. I've obviously tested the system here. So the neat thing about this guy, this is built by a company called N.I.N.A, is that it has the inverter. In other words, the inverter being what converts the 12-volt DC from the battery to 115 volts AC to run the web power switches and anything else that's on AC power. It also has a transfer switch. The transfer switch is the device that actually automatically switches you from line power to battery power in like 10 milliseconds. So you're not going to get a glitch that dumps the computer in that situation. So and then it also has a battery charger. So built in, it has the capability of charging this backup battery. So it's a one-stop solution of those three things that you need for a backup system. You need the inverter, you need the transfer switch, and you need an ability to charge your backup battery. And this gives you all three of these. These are typically, the typical usage for these is RVs, but I found that it works quite nicely for my purposes here. So I think I talked about the backup battery. This little cool box up here is the second one of the other little DIY projects. So this you can't see them here, but there are some LEDs on the top of this inverter that provide status. It tells you whether the battery is charging and whether you're on battery power, or whether you're boosting the battery. In other words, that it's been discharged and you're bringing it back up to float charge, or if you're in float charge, or heaven forbid you have an overtemp situation on your battery or on the inverter itself, or that you've gone into a low power save function. So those all those little LEDs are on the top of the inverter. That's nice, except I would like to be able to see those things on my dashboard because they're important. And so rather than go look for a different box that has all of these other functions that I like, I came up with the concept of building what I call an LED repeater. Pretty simple. There's a little schematic down there for you hardware folks in the audience, but it basically has a little phototransistor that senses the light from the LED that's under the box, and then it goes into another transistor that basically drives a repeater LED, And then at the same time, it sends a discrete high-low signal to the controller, to the Raspberry Pi on that GPIO bus that I talked about before. So so all of that little circuit, there are a total of 8 channels, and you can see them on the top here. And then the cable right here runs off to the Raspberry Pi, and specifically to this little graphical user interface. And then these signals are important too, because if this thing comes on, if we're on battery power, I am going to get a text message to my cell phone that tells me, uh-oh, we just went on battery power. So not only if the roof is open does it close, but I also get a warning that it happened. Okay, let's talk about the all-sky camera. So I'm going to talk about this mostly in light of the things that are unique to my implementation, because I know we've had a complete Astro Imaging Channel presentation on this. So I think Linda did some months ago, and so I'm not going to go through the details. I'd invite you to take a look at her video on this subject if you're interested in more detail. But this is the classic Thomas Jockin design. The really cool thing that I realized just in the last few months is that it has now been taken up by the open source community. So there's a group of folks now that is really maintaining and advancing the software. So this is a much more user-friendly experience than it was back when I initially built the camera. In my case, I've got a Raspberry Pi 3, which you can see mounted on edge down here inside this box for the camera. I'm using the Raspberry Pi HQ high quality camera as my all sky camera itself. Not shown on here, you can see it in this picture, is a fisheye lens. It's a 180-degree field of view lens. So I have an Ethernet interface. So this runs right from the Pi Ethernet back to the observatory, and the Pi picks it up right off the Ethernet for some of the signals here. I also have an internal fan, which is controlled by this Raspberry Pi. This little MOSFET, once again, that's the fan driver. The special thing is the cloud sensor. So there's a little guy here called an MLX 9614, which is an infrared thermometer. And this particular one has a 90-degree field of view. It's right in this corner. I think this picture was before I actually installed the sensor, but trust me, it's right in that corner. It's a dinky little thing, and it basically is pointed at the zenith, and it is looking at cloud cover. It interfaces via the I2C bus right to that general purpose input output 40-pin connector that I've been talking about on the Raspberry Pi, different Raspberry Pi. And so it's a serial interface that allows you to get the data, the temperature of the sky and the temperature of the sensor itself, which I don't use because it's abnormally warm. So I'll talk about that in a second. Also on the same mast here, all the wires basically for this go right down through the mast, by the way. I have a rain sensor, and that is a Hydrion RG9. This is a cool little guy. I actually tried to build my own rain sensor first. Let me encourage you that not to do that, because the type that have the little interlocking fingers and require relying on a resistance change when a raindrop bridges the fingers, yeah, they don't work. They're far too temperature sensitive, and yeah, they're going to be a disappointment for you. I built 3 of them, and then I got an RG9. This thing is an optical sensor, very clever. Actually has lasers inside that basically will bounce off from the sensor to the detector, and in the normal mode. But when you get raindrops on the outside, the laser beam actually escapes the housing and it doesn't go to the return detector, and that flags a rain event. So it's extremely sensitive. The sensitivity is adjustable. You can use it with a serial interface. I'm just using a simple-minded discrete here that goes back to the GPIO bus on the Raspberry Pi controller that's in the observatory. And so as I mentioned before, this is the guy that will close the roof if we get rain. And I probably should have showed earlier, but the all-sky camera, it is super, super useful. I actually, truth be told, use this a lot more than I use the cloud sensor, because it's just so cool. And hopefully you can see this this video running here. But here's the typical kind of a night where the cloud sensor is really handy, because here we have our Milky Way nicely coursing across the sky, and you're wondering, why in the heck am I constantly losing my guiding? Why is guiding keep failing? And one look at the 18-second video overnight from the all-sky camera will provide you the answer. Yeah, the clouds caused you to lose your guide star. Okay, and here's just a quick one, testing on the cloud sensor. So this is that previous slide that I showed you that had the temperature. So on here we have the sky temperature in blue. So this is provided by that MLX 9614 sensor. We have the outside temperature, and this comes from our weather station. The weather station is mounted away from the observatory under a nice tree so that it doesn't pick up sunlight and get artificially heated up. So this gives a pretty good, accurate temperature of the air temperature outside. And so what I've done then is I just simply take the difference between the sky temperature and the ground temperature. So large difference between the sky and the ground temperature, good. That means you probably don't have clouds. A low difference between the sky and the ground temperature, probably cloudy. And so here one night I did some kind of proof of concept testing. And so here you can see the times at different times of the night. The first one at 8 o'clock p.m. and then on into midnight, 2 in the morning, 3, 5, and 5:15. So this was a pretty nice test case, because we went from completely cloudy to partly cloudy to pretty much almost completely clear. And you could see by these arrows how the temperature varied. My intention eventually is to take this and go to put something on my control screen that would give me a one-word cloudy, partly cloudy, clear, and that'll be just based on this temperature. It'd be easy to do. I just haven't gotten around to doing it quite yet. Okay, by the way, maybe I should stop for questions. Are there any questions up to what I've been talking about so far?
I don't see any yet. I probably have some questions when you get a little further down the road. You might have some questions in the room, but I don't see any online right now. So
okay,
we're all good.
All righty. Okay, I will press on. So talking about a typical night of remote imaging. So there's a few things that I haven't really talked about much. I use N.I.N.A for my imaging. Again, another open source product. I love N.I.N.A. I've gotten to really get a lot better using it. I managed to graduate from the the basic sequencer over to the advanced sequencer, and yeah, I get better at it, and I love it more every time I use it. Super useful, free and open source, and definitely want to support those guys monetarily as well as just by using the product. So a typical day, I will select the targets, and in all honesty, I don't always do this first. Sometimes the roof is open and the sensor's cooling down, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to image tonight? Quick, come up with something. So then it's out to AstroBin or somewhere to find a good target, but or to my list that I keep. But so typically, when I'm really on my game, I will select targets first and get my imaging sequence put together. And that basically nowadays just involves taking the target and dragging it to the imaging sequence and replacing the image that was already there, because all the rest of the sequence typically doesn't change much. I will take a go, no-go, look at the weather status and forecast. If there's a chance of rain, or even if it's going to be cloudy for significant part of the night, I generally, I'm not a I'm not that dedicated. I'm gonna probably give it a pass that night. So the next, if the weather forecast looks good, I'm going to turn on the roof power, set the times for the roof auto open and close. Typically, I'll open the roof at sunset or give it at least an hour for everything to cool down. Typically, by half an hour, 40 minutes, things are pretty well equalized. But there's no sense in trying to try to cut it too fine. Next, I'll turn on the secondary power supplies. I needed to make sure I turn on the USB hub first, and then the cameras, and then the telescope mount. At some point, I'll probably automate this a little bit more, but a couple remote switch closures is not a big deal. I'll turn on the PC. I'll connect to the PC via Rust Desk. I haven't talked about this at all either, and I don't have a slide on it, but I've actually had quite the journey through remote desktop software. I started out with TeamViewer. I think in July of 2020, I was using TeamViewer. I think somebody on the channel warned me that it would eventually turn into a pumpkin, and sure enough, it did. Through no fault of mine, they suddenly decided that I was a commercial user, and so they cut me off. So I went to AnyDesk, and I used that for a while, and then AnyDesk just recently seemed like it was starting to limit the amount of time that I could connect, and it would periodically disconnect on me kind of for no reason. And so I looked for another solution, and I ended up with Rust Desk. So my son turned me on to this. He's a software developer, and he loves Rust. And so I should also give him a shout out, by the way. There's a few lines of code that were written for the cloud sensor that my son wrote in Rust and put out on GitHub, which I have there as part of the resources. So if somebody else would like to use it, you can. But in any event, Rust programming language, the guys wrote a really nice remote desktop program called Rust Desk. It's super simple to use. No, you do not need to know how to program. You do not need to know Rust or any other programming language for that matter. It has encrypted connections. So if anybody's looking for a free remote desktop software, I highly recommend Rust Desk. It's awesome. So I'll connect via Rust Desk. I'll start up N.I.N.A. Within N.I.N.A, I will connect up all of my observatory equipment. I'll load my imaging sequence, and then I will typically start my sequence to make it automatically start as soon as we hit astronomical dusk, or maybe 10 minutes before, so that I'll do my auto. I'll do my slew to target, my plate solve, and my autofocus before it gets completely dark, and then hopefully the moment it hits astronomical dusk, I'm ready to go, and I'm imaging my target. I'll log into my all sky camera, and typically on a given night, I usually have my PC at home here with dual monitors, and I'll have my all sky camera up, and my PhD guiding up, and I'll have my N.I.N.A screen up as well. And so I'm typically, if I'm live in front of the computer, I'll be monitoring all three of those things just to see how it's going. But or I could just go to bed, which lately, as I'm developing confidence in the system, I just go to bed. I come back in the morning, and the sequence is done, and the roof is closed, and the telescope is parked, and I'm good to go. By the way, I have not mentioned this, but earlier, back in July of 2020, I was worried about interaction between the observatory control computer and the imaging computer, because, oh my gosh, what if we have a situation where the telescope is not parked and the roof decides to close? I don't want them to ever have a possibility of a collision. So I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, how am I going to build this interlock system to make sure that the telescope's parked? Well, the simplest thing to do is just make sure it can't ever interfere, which is what I've done. So even with the dew shield on the front of the light baffle / dew shield on the front of the telescope, it can never touch the roof. So basically, even if the telescope failed to park, there's no possibility of any kind of collision there. So yeah, let me go on. So
Manny,
yeah.
just when I said there were no questions, we had a
Yes.
couple of questions or comments. Let me just
Great,
read off.
great.
Lyndon Thomas Fowler said, "This is a perfect application for hosting an ASCOM alpaca driver to get the data into N.I.N.A. And have questions, have you considered that? Not a writing one.
No, I'm aware of alpaca. And so I'm not sure if he's talking about data like telescope data, or if he's talking about imaging data. I'm not sure what data he's talking about. N.I.N.A, of course, handles all the imaging, so that the images already come through N.I.N.A. But in terms of, so I'm using ASCOM for all the drivers, for example, for the telescope, for the focus motor, for the imaging camera, for the guide camera. All of that is run through ASCOM directly to N.I.N.A. So that's already handled. And I haven't mentioned this, but I did mention Nextcloud earlier. So the way the images work right now is I have a folder on the computer this is the imaging computer that is in the observatory, that is a backed up folder. So Nextcloud is basically a cloud server automated backup system that we use not just for astronomy data, but for all of our data. And so the server, basically, you can set it up so that on each individual PC, or it can be a Linux machine. I actually do my PixInsight processing on a Linux machine. So all those machines can have their own specific folders that are backed up to the server. One of them that's in our home here in Southern California, another one that's up in Mariposa, the backup server, which I mentioned earlier. And so at the end of the night, actually, it doesn't even wait till the end of the night. N.I.N.A is placing the files in the folder that gets backed up to the server. The Nextcloud app, as soon as it sees there's a file that's in that folder, it automatically backs it up to our server.
Linda actually clarified her question. She was talking about weather data, cloud sensor data, roof status, and that kind of thing.
Cloud sensing data. What was the other status?
Cloud sensing, roof, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So so that I'm actually using. That's the thing I'm using Home Assistant and Node-RED for. Could have. Yeah, I'm certainly aware of alpaca. Could have gone that way. I decided that for my purposes, I liked the flexibility, and also the fact that its Home Assistant is so adaptable to other non-astronomy things. So all the learning that went into using Home Assistant is applicable to doing smart home automation stuff anywhere else I want to do it.
Okay, I think that's a good answer.
So let's see. I think I was getting into limitations and next steps. So yeah, so there are some limitations to what I have. So as I've gone through this, there's, it's semi-manual, right? So I've got there's switches, the remote switches, but that get flipped to get the system set up and to shut it down. So power sequencing, for example, starting up N.I.N.A, and then a little bit of end-of-night file transfer. And that's basically moving it from one folder that's on our local server right here, actually right behind me, and that moves it to a different folder. But that's super fast because it's already come down over the internet, and now it's sitting on my local server. So if somebody wants to have a super automated system, for example, no, I want to set up an imaging campaign that runs for a week, and it just goes, and I don't have to worry about it at all. Yeah, this is not that. Could I get there? Maybe I could. I probably could. But right now, I'm having fun where I am. and it's what I've got suits my purposes. And you know, I'm certainly willing to go out and spend a few minutes setting things up each night. It literally, if I've got a target already potted, the thing that takes the most time is coming up with the target set for the evening. If I'm all set, I can literally get everything up and ready, and you know, go watch a TV show with my wife in like 15 minutes. That's literally all it takes. So it's quite fast. The other thing, it's a limitation with what I have, and I knew this going in, was okay. So those that are familiar with the RASA know that, you know, you've got that camera on the front of the corrector plate, and so yeah, having a monochrome camera with a color filter wheel. I mean, I've heard of people doing it, but it's, you know, my setup is just not optimum for that, right? I'm probably not in the near term gonna go with a monochrome camera and a you know, and a filter wheel, not unless I get another telescope, which is a, you know, a possibility. I would love to get a nice refractor, which I could easily piggyback on the same mount. I hope my wife isn't listening to what I'm saying. So there's so typically I run either with just a straight light pollution filter if I'm running one-shot color. And that's if I'm on site, if it's near the new moon, if I'm shooting RGB stars, or if I'm, you know, looking at a very colorful image, that typically I'll run with a light pollution filter. And I didn't mention it, but I do have a filter drawer there, right there, that sits on right behind the camera. I never take the camera off. And so I haven't talked about darks and flats, but typically that's a manual process for me, but I don't need to take them that often. I'll do flats every couple of months. There's no, I haven't found an issue with the darks and flats aging for my setup. And I think a big part of that is that if you've got your scope in the observatory and you're not taking it off, taking the camera off, that serves a multiple ends. It avoids you getting dust specks on the camera, and it avoids you getting a tilt out of your tilt out of whack or something like that, to where it's going to mess up your stars in the corners of your image. So yeah, yeah, and typically when I'm remote, as I am now, I pop in my NBZ filter, and that's an HOO narrowband filter, hydrogen alpha in the red channel, and then oxygen 3 in the green and blue channels, and I have an HOO image to show you here in a minute. So next steps, we've got encryption, but I want to get a reverse proxy implemented all across our network, and that will set it up so that we don't need to use multiple port forwarding channels. Everything will be forwarded through the proxy. It's more secure. It's simpler. We have the world's worst router in Mariposa. The manufacturer shall remain nameless, and so every time they change something in the setup up there, it just messes up all my port forwarding and stuff. So I'm really looking forward to this, getting this done. There's some control software that I would love to get an interface going with N.I.N.A, and I know how to do it. It's not that hard. It just hasn't risen high enough on the priority list yet. But I could, for example, pause or terminate the image sequence if there was unsafe condition, or if I had clouds, or for some reason power loss or network loss. Just pause or terminate that imaging sequence. Currently, I'm not doing that, but I could if I interfaced with the controller. Also, I could. I have a web power. I have a timer in there, of course, for opening and closing the roof. I could add more web timers to my DLI switch for the scope, the guide cameras, and the imaging cameras. That's a down the road thing. I could also automate the dew heater power. Super simple thing would be if the dew point gets to within, say, 10 degrees of the temperature inside the observatory, flip on the dew heater. Right now it's manual. It would be super simple to implement it. I just haven't done it yet. The observatory, I'm sad to say I don't have an up-to-date picture in the briefing of the interior. It's mostly done as far as the wallboard and stuff, but I still want to put in some cabinets, put in a nice linoleum floor, and paint just to make it look a little bit nicer. So that's being done incrementally. And also, I'd like to put in a second pier. I'm also a visual observer. When folks are up and we want to look at the moon, we want to look at Jupiter. I have a C11 that was my original telescope. Right now I have to set it up on a tripod, and it's like, gee, why can't I just put that on that second pier, which has been the plan from day one. I'm also considering building kind of a split level to have the floor higher for the south pier. Obviously, I need to have some safety railings and things, but for visual observing, you really like to, or I really like to have that horizon to horizon view to drink in the Milky Way. And to be able to see, sometimes there are things that just don't get very high above the horizon. Things in the summer sky, Milky Way sky, Helix Nebula, for example, really low. And so it'd be cool to have a scope that can tip closer to the horizon. And with that, I think I'm basically done with the presentation about the observatory. So I figured, since it is the Astro Imaging Channel, I quickly show a couple of quick astro images. And so this one here is special to me. This was taken back last November, not quite a year ago. This is you might recognize as the tadpoles. This is IC 410, and this is my very first ever remote image. So this was taken on a single night. It was about 7 hours of integration time. And November 21st, 2022 is the first time that I, kind of sucked it up and said, okay, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to do a remote image. And this is what we got. This was processed with PixInsight, less some of the newer tools now. There's no generalized hyperbolic stretch here. There's no blur exterminator or a star exterminator, noise exterminator. So someday maybe I'll go back and reprocess, but there we go. This one, some of you will also recognize. This is Comet Leonard back in December of 2021. So this was obviously not done remotely. It was before I had it, but one of the main reasons for getting the RASA is I love wide field. It's not only easier, but I just love wide field nightscapes, and I love comets. And so one of the things I want to do is hopefully take a lot more comet images. And so so here was a nice one with M3 and Comet Leonard back in 2021. Also, from earlier this year, I'm sure many of you are aware of the supernova in M101. I took these images back on June 14th through the 17th. This is a combination of some RGB and narrowband HOO data to try to bring out a little bit of the star forming regions. And so there you got here's a zoomed in version, kind of a before and after image showing April of 2022. This was before we had the my son is trying to call me in the middle of my presentation. So the April 2022 image here shows what this corner of the nebula looked like, or the spiral nebula, the galaxy looked like during before the supernova occurred. And then this was after, in June of 2023. And then finally, last but not least, here's this is a strictly, I don't think that's true. This has got RGB stars, but the lion's share of the imagery here is HOO. So about 4 or 5 hours of HOO imaging and of RGB imaging, and the remainder is all narrowband, about not quite 19 hours worth. And so this is probably one of the dimmest targets that I've tried yet. So this is the Medulla Nebula. I've also heard it called the Garlic Nebula, the Popped Balloon Nebula, the Brain Nebula. It has lots of words, lots of names. But this one was really cool, a lot of fun to process. And so that's the last one I have. So don't expect to read this one, but resources, what's available here. This kind of will take you through all the stuff that I talked about and where you can find more information on all of it, including the little cloud sensor routine that my son wrote, and the weather station, the Astro Imaging Channel by presentation by Linda Thomas Fowler. You name it. I try to capture everything here that you might be interested if you want to go down the same road that I've gone down. And then finally, if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can reach me by email here. Hopefully, having it embedded in a presentation will not get me spam from the greater internet. But obviously, if you're on this, if you're watching this presentation, you're more than welcome to reach out to me via internet. I have an AstroBin account. There it is, and I also have a website, just kind of getting started. But there's some interesting things on there, including a few articles about the observatory build that goes into some more details. It doesn't go as far as this presentation does, but I'm going to hopefully write those articles and put them out on my website here in the coming months. So that's about it. I'd be happy to entertain any questions that anyone has.
I don't see any more questions, but you have some nice comments online about your presentation. And Tariq says he's now going to go back and revisit having a Pi as a controller.
Jump in, the water's fine.
Yeah, I have a Pi too, but it's sitting on the shelf not doing anything because I never figured it out.
Yeah, there's a lot of good resources out there. Like I say, I'm a hardware guy, and if I can figure out the Pi, you can too.
You can stop sharing if you want it, Manny.
Oh, sure.
Well, that was really impressive, Manny. And you really just scratched the surface on this automation and this type of setup when you were here the last time. So this is light years ahead of where you were before. So it's really neat to see the progression here over the last few years. And I get the sense that you've been having a lot of fun, not just with the imaging and that, but with all these systems and coming up with your solutions and tinkering with the little all the different projects. It seems like that's just been I imagine you've really enjoyed that.
Definitely part of the fun. I mean, it's it's obviously taken a long time to get here. To be clear, hopefully people aren't terrified and going, oh my gosh, it takes 3 years to do this. It's there's a lot of fits and starts. There's a lot of travel. There was a lot of COVID. There's a lot of stuff in between. So I'm definitely not not full time on this by any stretch. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. If you'd like to tinker, I highly encourage people to give it a try. I'm happy to be a resource for anybody that does it. My Node-RED and Home Assistant software, I don't have it posted anywhere right now. I could maybe down the road. It probably needs a bit of explanation, but if somebody is interested and would like to reach out to me and is interested in that code, I'm happy to provide it and provide any help to anybody that wants to embark on that kind of a project.
And you mentioned the use of the HO two-band filter, so you physically have to be there to put that in.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I've thought I want somebody to invent a filter change arm that works with a RASA that doesn't block the aperture. I would buy one. I would love that. But yes, you're absolutely right. I have to. So that's why I'll have maybe the light pollution filter in if I'm local on site and I shoot RGB stuff. And before I go home, because I know I'm going to be shooting with the moon, right? I take the light pollution filter out, put the NBZ filter in, and then when I'm remote, I'm shooting HOO. This is a drag, of course, if there's a comet or something up, now I got an HOO filter and dag nabbit, but hopefully, if I know there's a comet up, I'll just, leave the RGB filter in there and just live with it. So.
We have some people do presentations on these kinds of observatories. And there's always a discussion about animals getting into it or underneath it. You have any issues with that?
Um, I had a significant issue with that, which I go into detail with on in my first presentation back in July of 2020. I had mice, and so yeah. So here's a tip. If you use this Reflectix insulation like I do, which is as opposed to like what I'm trying to think of, the like spun glass insulation that's really thick. If you use the thin stuff, that's reflected, basically reflects the heat back out so that you don't absorb. Anyway, if you use that stuff and you don't immediately put on your wall board, be very sure that you staple it down to your 2x4s everywhere very well, because the mice will get behind it and build nests. So I literally had to like tear a bunch of it out and clear the mice and put it back in. Since then, I've been a lot more careful with that. And also I have a couple of mouse baits in the observatory. So once they really have not been back. So knocking wood, I think we're okay now with but mice are the issue, because literally with a roll-off roof, it's almost impossible to completely seal it up so that they can't get in there. So
yeah, they can get into the tiniest little holes and things that you would look at and think, well, surely nothing can fit into that, but somehow they.
Yes, I heard a nickel. Is all they need.
Now, is there anyone that, if something happens, that can go up there and help you out?
Yeah, I didn't mention that, but we made friends with our neighbors to the north, and I actually gave him a tour of the observatory. I gave him a key. We have each other's contact information, and he's about my age, good guy, and he's got some grandkids that live nearby, and so I'm gonna be treating them to an outreach event sometime soon, and show them Jupiter and Venus, and so it's. Let me say it this way: I have not yet needed his help, but he's there in the event that catastrophe strikes.
Thinking back to your previous presentation, you had talked about thermal management. That was something you were concerned about, and of course,
right.
Has that been an issue for you at all? Are you pretty happy with the solution that you implemented for that?
I am. Just a couple of minutes on that. So I actually tried a couple of different things, which is actually I have a write-up in one of my articles that's on my website if people want to read it. But it's called Thermal Considerations. So if you look at that one, it talks in some detail about what I did. But I actually ran a whole test program, and I started with nothing on the walls. The prevailing wisdom is always, no, do not insulate the observatory, right? You need it to equalize fast. Don't insulate it, right? And so I can understand that, but it just kind of, in my view, it just doesn't look great, to have 2x4 studs. So my goal was to figure out a way to have it, quickly thermally equalize and still have it look nice from the inside, to have wallboard. Masonite is what I use. Trying to come up with the word earlier. But anyhow, I ran a whole test program. I built a temperature logger, again, using a Raspberry Pi, and a bunch of individual thermocouples, which I put all over the observatory, on the roof, on the telescope mount, everywhere. And I logged a bunch of data. This is in the article I wrote. And the upshot of the whole thing is, as long as you use reflective thermal insulation, it really doesn't matter a lot whether you put wallboard on there, or whether you leave it open, or whether you don't put any insulation on there. There's really not a big difference at all. It equalizes in 20 to 40 minutes or so. And the advantage, so here's the advantage of insulating, right, is that if your observatory is not insulated at all, it is going to get bloody hot in the summertime. And in Mariposa, it's gotten to 110. And it will get to 130 in the observatory if you do that. So right now, and again, I have temperature monitoring, so I know this. The observatory interior never gets more than about 10 degrees above the external temperature, and I'm not fully insulated yet, almost, but not quite. And so I basically have an air conditioner floor mounted, which I don't love, but anyway, I do have a little air conditioner that helps with that. And so typically I can keep it to the outdoor temperature. Typically I'm not above 90 too often. So I try to keep it to 90 degrees inside the observatory if I can, but I may have to go to a bigger air conditioner and go window mount to really get it down, because I thought I had enough BTUs it was supposedly good enough for a 300-foot space, but even though mine's only 120 square feet, yeah, it doesn't quite hack it, but it's better than nothing.
Manny, when you say that you're using wallboard, are you talking gypsum wallboard on your observatory?
No, I didn't say that right. It's really masonite. So it's thin, it's an 1/8 inch thick masonite. So I wanted to make sure I picked something that doesn't have a lot of thermal mass, right? So you want something that isn't going to absorb and retain a lot of heat. And
we use pegboard a lot. Pegboard.
Right. And by the way, I tested using pegboard. Pegboard was one of the things I tested. And guess what? It's no better than masonite. Measured the temperature underneath the pegboard, and on the surface of the pegboard, it's the same.
Does it cost any more? Is there any cost differential?
No, I don't think so. It just doesn't. I just think masonite looks better. That's all.
Okay.
But pegboard would be fine, sure.
Well, if there's no actual difference as far as the temperature performance, you might as well go with what's more aesthetically pleasing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would say the only issue with the masonite, and this kind of a warning if you want to try it, is that I think it's a bit hygroscopic. And so this would probably be better once it's painted. It's not now. If you leave it like in one environment, say I had it inside a room that had, I think, higher humidity than the observatory. When I put it in the observatory and screwed it down, it crinkled. And so I actually had to undo the screws. I use drywall screws so that I can take the masonite out if I have to. And then I reattached it to get rid of the crinkles. So a fair warning, if you use masonite, be careful. I think probably making sure you dry it out and then painting it right away is probably help. And any other solution that has low thermal mass would be good too.
Well, this has really been fascinating, Manny. So, and thank you so much for coming back on the show. And I think when there was talk about having you come back before, I don't know that anyone thought it would be 3 years later. Although it's been certainly kind of a weird 3 years. I think we can all attest to that. But it turned out good because you've had all this additional time to learn all these other things and give us all this additional useful information. So, and maybe sometime we can have you come back again to tell us about spaceships.
If anybody's interested, I could talk your ear off about that.
Manny, when we end the show, you're welcome to stay on and have a little chat session afterwards. Or if you'd rather go to bed and watch TV. But as long as you're here.
Might as well stick around for a few more minutes, but I think we're all out. Looks like we got all the questions, and
I think we did.
Tim, you can take us out whenever you're ready.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
See you next week, hopefully.
Bye.